All right. So today, kind of the reason we're having this talk is around security analytics. And it's not just theory. Hashmap was actually hacked in February of 2019 of this year, and cost us a lot of money. And that's kind of how this is going to be the story of how we got into doing security analytics. So what was the hack? We woke up one morning and found that we had very, very large, many thousands of dollar bills from AWS stemming from EC2 instances. So these are the virtual machines in AWS that had been running really globally overnight. And these were big, expensive, beefy machines. I don't personally know the exact amount of dollars that it costs, but the person who was in charge of this organization, I texted them a while ago and they told me it was $9,000, $10,000 overnight. In real dollars, not credits, not anything. This is real dollars. What had happened was, and we found this out pretty quickly by messaging the team and just exploring manually, that someone in one of our dev teams had committed their credentials for AWS into GitHub. And I guess this is a common enough thing for people to do that there are scripts that will look for those credentials and we'll try to leverage them. We don't have any monitoring at that time on any of our AWS accounts. So when it happened and everyone was sleeping, no one noticed. None of our users had MFA enabled, so once you had those credentials, that's it. You are that person. And when we contacted AWS, because that's one of the first things we did, they suspected crypto mining. They see stuff like this quite a lot. So people will find your credentials, fire up a bunch of virtual machines, will mine Bitcoin or some other crypto, as long as they can while it's on. And then when you turn it off too late, they've already absconded with all their coins. And the really only way we had to address it was to reissue everyone's credentials, which was kind of a stop in business and development where people had to go reset their dev tools. But it kind of came and passed, and we're kind of left wondering, like, how do we keep this from happening again? Is this just a thing that's going to happen from now on? Yeah, it'd be great if our devs wouldn't do that, but things happen, right? If we're not going to monitor the environments we're in and we're going to still allow people to have lots of freedom, then we're going to face issues like this. So something has to change. But to really dive into this hack, we still didn't really understand what happened. AWS said it was crypto mining, sure, but what other things occurred that led up to this event? Were there indicators of bad activity before we actually had to spend all that money? So what we did was look at CloudTrail. This is an actual screenshot from the CloudTrail interface in AWS, and CloudTrail is their logging service. So everything that happens on the platform gets logged here. So if I want to find out how or why something went wrong, I want to do a forensic investigation, I would do that here. The problem is that it doesn't really let you dive into it super well. There are JSON files that they line up here, and you can sort by time, but that's basically it. So we kind of knew what we were looking for from a specific person who had been hacked, but we didn't know what else had happened, and it was just not feasible to dive through every little piece of this. Opening up one of the files, this is what you see, not immediately parsable to a person. I've highlighted in red here some of the parts I did find useful, particularly the IP address. So I popped the IP address into an online IP address location tracker, and it comes out of Shanghai, China. That's interesting. It's not actionable. I don't know what to do about that. They're probably not in Shanghai, because if I was in Shanghai and I knew how to do this, I would not tell people I was in Shanghai. I don't know. But okay, I'm kind of doing security detective work now. This is fun. The other two pieces of information I found useful, in addition to the IP, was the instance type, which is a C5D 18 extra large. That's not an instance that exists anymore. It has a slightly different name, but it's a heavy compute resource, and it was out of London, which we don't have any reason to fire anything up in London. So it definitely was part of the virtual machines that were being used for malicious intent. But this wasn't scalable. That took me like 2 or 3 minutes to find one record with 3 pieces of information. And that's if I know exactly what I'm looking for. I didn't know what I was looking for, so how do I discover new things? And that's where Snowflake comes in. So the CloudTrail logs are stored in S3. That's just a file store you can think of on AWS, and they're just JSON files. So JSON, because it's not perfectly structured, I can't just use a normal SQL engine. I can't use Athena all that well, which is a SQL query engine on S3. It does support JSON. I just don't find it very natural to use. And I've been using Snowflake a little bit at this point, probably 3 or 4 months. So we just ingested the data directly in. I didn't have to do anything, really. I just set up the stage connection, and now I have CloudTrail logs in Snowflake. And I did exactly the same work you saw before, but I wanted to see what instances were actually used across the board. Are they all the same? Are they different? And I found that there's 15 different instances that they fired up. The different naming conventions from AWS, they're not super intuitive, but they do mean something. C is for high compute, I is storage, M is a general, it's the next generation general instance purposes. Anyone on AWS who's used a T2 micro, this is that one's big brother. And then R and X, they're memory intensive. Nothing in here is GPU though, which was interesting. And I don't know much about crypto, but I would have assumed if they were mining, they would have fired up some massive GPU instances. That's it. That's all I know about this. That mystery is not solved. Maybe this is how the new generation mines cryptocurrency. But it was also a powerful moment for me to realize, well, let me compare what I did before, what I assume security engineers do, dive into the logs, look for things, identify patterns. That was hard, but by treating it more like a data engineering issue, like I would literally any other problem, I was able to move incredibly fast. My efficiency was really increased. And I come to this powerful realization that security is a data engineering problem. I'd always assumed that you needed this long storied past in security, and you need to have seen things get broken and understand exactly how that works. And I think there are places for that. But for something like this, you can go a long way with just a little SQL and a little analytics. So that's how we started doing security with Snowflake. This showed to be too good to just walk away from. We still don't know how to prevent something like this from happening. We just have kind of a interesting story about the Shanghai IP address that likes heavy compute and memory resources. Any questions about that hack so far? Okay. So let's look at the state of our security architecture. We have CloudTrail logs coming into Snowflake. At this time, it seems valuable enough to make that happen continuously. So I set up Snowpipe, if you're familiar with that. As files land, they will be ingested into Snowflake. I flatten the files because they come in as JSON. CloudTrail can get very large, millions and millions of records, and if you're, for every query, going to hit every partition to expand the variant before you can actually query, that's going to suck. You're not going to get good performance. So I fixed that. I flattened everything out because it is actually relatively structured, and I have a table. But I'm good at SQL. I think I'm really good at SQL, but I don't naturally flow and discover through SQL. I'm more of a visual person. So I needed a visual component. And that's where I got involved with Sigma. Sigma is a partner of ours. They give us a free instance, so I get to play with it. That's cool. It's just a BI tool. Think of like Excel or Tableau in the cloud. And I found it to be by far the best way to integrate with Snowflake. The other BI tools have issues. This has issues too, but this one for me is way easier to use. So my stack now looks like I have continuous CloudTrail logs streaming into Snowflake, and I'm able to explore them on Sigma. And that's what I want to show you next. I actually have this live bit.ly link. After this event, you guys can get on this bit.ly link and check out our CloudTrail logs. They've been scrubbed so as to not provide any more hackable information. There was a version of this that was entirely hackable. I just included the raw data that, like, if you made an STS call, you would get the tokens. And I thought, man, can you imagine me giving this talk and then getting hacked because of it? That would suck. So yeah, let me pop this open. And I'll ask you to remember that original CloudTrail image I showed you and compare it to this. So what's going to happen now is that in Snowflake, I have a warehouse called my Sigma warehouse that is going to turn on. It is a small right now for demo purposes. And because we're doing a demo, I'm going to keep this from turning off. Yeah, it's not really for showing, honestly. This is a thing I should have done earlier. Cool. So jumping back into Sigma. These are our CloudTrail logs, excluding some S3 activity, so read, list. You can imagine S3, if you think of it as a file directory, anytime anyone opens an S3 page or clicks to see what's there or just moves to a new page, it makes a new record. Anytime any other service asks S3 what's there, it makes a new record, and it is by far the largest. Another 30 million records exist as S3. So I can even turn that off. So 35 million records we're churning through right now. We can see this history over time. But now, if I'm trying to investigate something that has happened, I can really easily, I know that this happened in February. These are real logs, by the way. So I can go back to March and make that my cutoff time. I know that EC2 is the service that was involved. So if I include the event source as EC2, I start to get a picture of just the service I care about, and I can see over time different spikes in activity. And I know there was a specific error, and this is something I was lucky to find early on. The hackers, when they got those credentials, they didn't know exactly what our system level configurations were on AWS, so they didn't know how many instances they could fire up. So instead of checking, they just kept trying to fire them until they couldn't anymore, until they got an error saying you have too many VMs. So that specific error, I can filter by that error code right here. We have client instance limit exceeded. So it's a client error saying that the limit has been exceeded. You can't create anything else. And this is basically our hack. Down here is obviously too small. I can try to zoom in here. Some things will break a little bit. But I can start to see over time, going back to February 6th, what specific user and what error I was getting. And right away I noticed that Jenkins, our CI/CD tool, is one of the compromised credentials. We didn't know about that. We knew about a person. So already by doing something like this, I can isolate different users that were compromised at the time that we didn't know about. If we had not bulk repealed credentials and we'd only fixed one person's, we would have still had a compromised account. Coming down further, we have another person who I actually think they were the one who discovered the hack. That's why they got a VM instance exceeded. They were trying to create something, so that's genuine. And then we have, unfortunately, another person from a Hashmap. I won't say their name, we're streaming live. It's not their fault. This could have happened literally to anyone in the company, but this is the other person who had that. So from this information, I can start to develop an understanding of what a hack would look like. And I know right away we have, in any CloudTrail log I get, a really good indicator of compromise, the error code. So anytime I see this kind of error code, I should treat it as maybe we're being hacked again. Now, I don't necessarily have to shut everything down or wake someone up in the middle of the night over that, because sometimes it does happen naturally. But if you see a number of them in a row, someone should do something. And at the very least, yeah, we got hacked, but it didn't cost us 10 grand because we left it on overnight. I should also mention, AWS refunded us a bunch of money, and it ended up costing much less than that, maybe 2,000 or 3,000. But still, that's a big deal for our cloud budgets. So that is kind of the power of thinking of some of your log data that you traditionally would put in a log security tool or a SIM tool. You could pop it into Snowflake or really any SQL engine now that compute is very elastic and you can expand it to build these kind of dashboards that are interactive and allow people who are not subject matter experts to ask questions anyone would. And that allows you to get to patterns. So now that I have this pattern, this specific IP address that I've identified as being compromised, it's a bad IP address, and this specific error code, what do I do about that? I think I personally could look and be like, okay, this fourth identity next month has a ton of instance exceeded error codes and it comes from that same IP address. That's probably a hack again. We should turn it off. Does it always have to be me? Is there a way to like do that interactively or automatically? So going back to our slides here, that's where SnowAlert comes in. And I'm gonna simplify SnowAlert a lot. SnowAlert is an open source project from Snowflake, the company. Their security team uses this. And at the time, back in February, March, we had been talking with their team to co-develop a talk on the technology for their summit in May. And this was, the hack was almost kind of timely because it gave us something interesting to talk about. And SnowAlert does something very, very simply. We're gonna shut it down. It takes any alert query view and turns it into an alert on a schedule. So what's an alert query view? They have an expected number of columns that in this space that they monitor, you can define a view such as select every CloudTrail log that comes from this IP address. and it'll tell you what columns it wants to pick out. It's like 10 columns. And then on a schedule, this little task runner will check for any hits there, and if it finds hits, it'll save them in your alerts table. This is powerful because once you set up the infrastructure, it takes very little time to do that. You can create alert query views as many as you want. Anyone who can create a view now can add a new alert to your monitoring system. They don't have to have custom login stuff. They don't know how to use a new tool. It's just SQL view definitions. And that's exactly what we did. So we start monitoring with SnowAlert, where it'll, on a schedule, every hour, every 2 hours. Some people go faster than that, and they go 15, 10 minutes. They'll pull all the logs, check for those bad behavior things, the things we discovered from our CloudTrail environment, and will alert me at different severity levels of things occurring. The biggest thing I want to look for is that IP address and that specific error occurring again. So with that alerts table will contain all of my alert definitions over time. I can have 20, 30, multiple teams can create them, and I can now dashboard that. And again, this is live. So this is a subset of our, what we would deem publicly shareable alerts. And after this, you guys could go and click and explore it yourself, which is a lot of fun. I actually find that the CloudTrail one is particularly fun to explore. So it's a similar kind of view. I see that I have 74 unique queries over time. If I filter this out to, I don't know, the last month, I can see I have 55, just medium and high level alerts. And right here, I have the different alert definitions, and these are as flexible as I want them to be. So I have, anytime an activity is issued on Snowflake by an admin, I want to make sure I capture that. So most people shouldn't be using the admin role, and it should be some kind of alert. I actually have it being a low-level alert if it's me, because I already know about it, and this is mostly for me. But if anyone else does, we do a lot of training on our Snowflake instance, and it is common to give people account admin access, root access before they're necessarily like super certain about what to do with it. So I like to keep track of what goes on here. And then we have some other ones, specifically our new AWS user alert query. So anytime someone creates a user, that can be an environment where someone has IAM access and they create a user and grant it really high privilege. IAM access denied. And we haven't had any EC2 instance exceeded errors, but those would pop up here as well. And for a data engineer, I'm already very comfortable with this technology. This makes sense to me. Over time, as new things happen or new threats become available, maybe, and this is something we looked at, can I get a list of all the Tor IP addresses that if someone who's using Tor is going to interact with you, it would look like one of these set list of IP addresses, and then flag any IP addresses from that on here as being bad or compromised? That's something people are doing. We don't do it, but we could. And this allows me to add a little context, not just from my logs. So keep in mind, what I have here it's monitoring AWS and Snowflake, and it's actually monitoring two different AWS accounts. Anyone who's used the cloud may have found it difficult to, especially on AWS, how many EC2 instances do you have running right now across everywhere? That's a hard question to ask because it'll only show you in specific regions, in specific accounts. But with this approach, we can collect all of the data in one spot and we can view it. You're also not going to get a single pane of glass monitoring from the cloud. You would just get an AWS view or an Azure view or a Snowflake view, and you have to reconcile all of those somehow. And this allows me to add the context both of my security and cloud platforms, but also maybe I have some HR data. I can take in and identify, well, why is someone in sales messing with our production instances? That's not good. Those kind of things, you can add a richer context that would be very difficult on another system. So going back into our stack here that we're describing, we have SnowAlert working very well for us. And any data engineer who can create a view now has the ability to create a new alert definition. And as things happen and occur, we can fire off an alarm. I think of it like a fire alarm. If there is a fire, the alarm will go off. But what if we have a bunch of paper bags real close to the stove? It's not on fire, but you shouldn't do that. We don't have any way to preempt stuff from happening. So one thing that might be an issue is we did get hacked, but if we had MFA enabled, maybe it wouldn't have worked. And MFA not being enabled, it's not an alert, it's not a fire alarm going off It's more of a technical debt thing. Your current state is bad. You should do something about that. SnowAlert does a second thing very, very well, and that's called violations. Violations, it's the same exact concept, but where alert queries are going to look for temporal events, things that are happening over time, and be very concerned about letting you know. Think of that as something you should maybe be taking action on right now. Violations are more going to capture your technical debt over time, like some X% of your admins don't have MFA. You should fix that. You maybe don't wake anyone up about that in the middle of the night, but when your infrastructure team comes in on Monday, or you're going to do a quarterly review, you might want to see how many of these violations over time they've fixed. Again, you get the same benefit though of having, once it's been set up, you just have to define SQL definitions, and those are your rules. You don't have to use these really rather expensive and maybe a little overpowered tools to do essentially environment monitoring. And that's what we did. We started adding violations. We still have the same stack, and one of my favorites is the MFA violation. We also have some stuff where if you have traffic rules on some of your security groups, and that's an AWS thing, that allow traffic to come in from anywhere, and it's not tagged as something that should be public, that's a violation. This allows you additional exposure to attacks, and it lets me balance, at an admin perspective, the ability to let our teams learn and move fast and do their own things. So I don't have to restrict them, but I can also make sure it doesn't turn into the Wild West, which it often can. And then you get to the end of the month, and it's not maybe a hack, but maybe our bill's high and we don't know why. What do you do about it? The problem with what I've described before here is that CloudTrail logs are time-based. So violations will handle stateful information, but CloudTrail logs don't really bring that in. If I wanted to get my current state, I'd have to start from zero and replay the CloudTrail logs and keep track of what has happened, and that's not feasible. Instead, I use Fivetran, which is an ETL tool to ingest additional state information about my environments. Fivetran is an incredibly easy web-based managed ETL service that has multiple connectors to existing data sources and treats the clouds as first-class citizens. So you can, in the 3 major clouds, run any sort of function you want, and it'll take that data, create the tables exactly for you, and the data will just show up. Good ETL can be ignored because it just works. You take it for granted. So my experience with Fivetran is I set it up once and I forget about it for months. That's my favorite thing about it. And for this, I set up AWS Lambda scripts. It's kind of small here, but I have 4 different monitoring scripts. One is EC2, which is those VMs. I have Elastic Load Balancers being monitored. A lot of traffic will flow through those. IAM, which is their identity management. And this is where I'll get information about that MFA that I care so much about. And then security groups. This is more traffic policies that I want to monitor. And this is the complete kind of ecosystem of security monitoring with Snowflake. I have some arbitrary number of existing log data that lands in either Blob storage in Azure or AWS S3. That gets in natively with Snowflake stuff. I personally like Fivetran to move fast in these environments where I kind of don't know what I'm doing. It's not worth building the robust, expensive pipeline when I can just use Fivetran out of the box. Over time, if I can make an economic decision that this is valuable, I'll go back and build it by hand, save a little money, but it's not worth doing that until you know this is a valuable activity. SnowAlert is gonna automate the checking of both our bad states with violation, our current tech debt. They're also gonna look for known bad behavior to alarm someone about, and then Sigma's gonna handle the consumption for everyone. And this is where we get our violations view. And this one is one of my favorites. So in a company like ours, we do a lot of training. Being a consulting company, we have multiple accounts. It is very common for things to be wrong at any given point. But we also have to balance that with being able to clean it up after it's been wrong while someone has learned or they've gotten their skills up. So the 2 major things that I monitor for is an IAM user that doesn't have MFA, and we can see over time how those change. That's in the blue here. It hasn't gone down a lot. And there are maybe good reasons for that, but maybe not good ones. And then we look for our open security groups. We have a ton of open security groups. A bulk of these are just generally created by default when someone fires up a VM They delete the VM and then forget to delete this. I know a lot of people in the cloud, you've done that. You've forgotten to delete something. Luckily, they don't charge for security groups, but for other things, that could be expensive. So this is something we track, and we're in the process of building ticketing systems to handle right now in our IT support stuff. We're getting more mature in this space. But it allows us to track over time, are we getting better or worse? And there was a time where our MFAs were getting better, and I think we've actually staffed up. That's what's happened here, and haven't implemented MFA. And I can see the individual event data at the bottom here. Again, this has been scrubbed, so there's not anything we wouldn't want out. In our more private stuff, we would be able to actually link to a backend ticketing system like Jira. And you can click on the specific event, you can see who it's assigned to, and you can track its process. You can actually see if an alert is one of 10 or 15 that are actually correlated. They appear to be of the same event, and that allows us to not have too much noise, right? We want to just get the needles and leave the haystack alone. So that's, in a nutshell, all there is to security monitoring with Snowflake. You do what any data engineer would do. I have this amount of data that's kind of a pain to sift through. Your security engineers are probably highly skilled individuals, highly experienced, and they're probably expensive. So wasting their time playing around through JSON files, that's not smart. Can we automate the stuff they don't want to do? That's what I think a lot about as a data engineer. And let them focus on the higher value things, like identifying those patterns or seeing the things I wouldn't catch. Like maybe that compromised user, the Jenkins user, there's some more information about that IP address. I didn't show it here, it had a different IP address. So if I grab the 2 different IP addresses, could I take that and get more information out of it from another system, even a more high-powered system? That's possible. But something that I found really impressive is that after we gathered all this data in one spot and we started tracking it, I spent a lot of time not on security, but on other things that I found they were painful, but with this data in place, I could dashboard my way around solving them. And it's what I actually think is a little more exciting. Two major bonus values that I found: audit-friendly compliance monitoring and cost monitoring. So when you're saying that your violations are security-based, but they're defined by SQL, I can make violations be around data quality. I can make a violation be in the history logs. I saw that someone from the wrong group accessed information that they weren't allowed to see. And for audit, I can guarantee that either didn't happen, or if it did, we followed the appropriate procedure. I've worked with organizations that need to be security compliance certified, and a lot of their work is manually synchronizing Excel sheets to do something like, there's a certain standard in one of the policies that says if someone is let go from the company, they're fired, whatever, they leave, they must have no access to anything within 24 hours. And that process took over a week to verify between 2 different organizations that would send Excel sheets to this very talented, very skilled security engineer who would then have to reconcile them, and at best could say, yeah, we violated. They couldn't actually do anything about it at that time, where we were able to come in and suck all their data up and synchronize that process and just give them a report of when it happens, and maybe give them an early warning. Maybe you hit hour 20 and it's time to manually intervene so you maintain compliance. And then my personal favorite, because this is such a pain point to me, and I think it's a pain point to anyone new to the cloud, is cost monitoring. In a specific cloud, I might have some dashboarding capabilities. I actually think Azure does a really good job with that. AWS does a good job as well. Not as good in my opinion, but both are fine. But what if I want to look at both? Or what if I want to ask a question they aren't prepared to answer for me because their dashboards are pre-canned? That's where this approach can be very powerful. And that's exactly what I do. So I publish this one publicly because the Hashmap usage data doesn't include, it's not as intimate, I would say. But I am going to show you guys today, not with a link you can use. I'll show you some cross-cloud monitoring that has a little more intimate data that allows me to drill into cost events. So also, super small, nothing to worry too much about. The top number is our rolling average credits used. It's a rolling sum, actually. It's a window function. So in the last 30 days, how many credits did we use? This number, 67, at a corporate, at an enterprise engagement, it's at $3 each. So it's like $200, $210. Not a lot a month, but before I implemented this dashboard, we were spending close to 1,000. I was able to drop our costs just by throwing this up here by 80%, and that can be meaningful. The biggest issue I found, so we see that our build time by user, Snowflake doesn't, It does some really cool things out of the box. It allows you to hit metadata tables that show usage and metering at the warehouse level. But a lot of the time, and I see this at organizations newer to Snowflake, they set up one big warehouse and a lot of people use it. And when you ask, why is this warehouse spending so many credits, it's not easy to figure that out. Like who specifically was using it? Snowflake, for good reason, doesn't show that credit by person data because it's hard to do. But you can get a proxy for how much load a person is putting on the system by calculating their node seconds. I'm sorry. A warehouse will bill you 1 credit an hour for every node it has. So if I write down the milliseconds you ran a process times the number of nodes you use, I get this kind of proxy, right? There are other minimum billing things. There are other, if you and I are both using it at the same time, they don't double bill. But this allows me to focus on where things are. Right now, SnowAlert is my top user, and that's the service user for monitoring, which is good because it doesn't use a lot, and it means everyone else is behaving. When we came in here, and you can see down here, this is my task activity. Anyone familiar with tasks on Snowflake? Yeah, they're just scheduled events. They just run over and over, like a cron job, right? And we had some that were wildly out of control. We were able to turn off 2 or 3 that by themselves had warehouses running 24/7. So even on the smallest size, that's 24 credits a day, which is $75. For nothing, by the way. It wasn't even like for value. It was a training thing someone forgot to turn off. Again, not their fault. That's an admin failure. But Snowflake doesn't make this data easy to see. I was able to use Fivetran to actually get me the right table for this. There is no table out of the box that lets you see this data. And then I can also identify pipes. I can dive into the non-warehouse places where telling me what to do about this, that information would reside. The warehouse tells you what was billing, but it's not always clear how to fix it. So this is actually one I'm super proud of. I like this. You guys should play with this. Outside of that, something I built this morning, actually using Fivetran, is both an AWS and an Azure Blob cost monitoring tool. So I thought initially I would have to write a custom Python app that reads the billing APIs on Azure and AWS, because by default, their billing information isn't immediately available at a fine granularity where I can do anything about it. You normally have to wait for the bill at the end of the month. That sucks. But I was able to find both have services that will write detailed billing information to their file storage options. So in AWS, I have that writing to S3, which was just it was like a button click to figure that out. And then the same with Azure. I just created a blob container, and then I pointed the service to that and said, drop them in there every day. So with that, I didn't want to actually create the SQL to load that data because each one, the columns are like, they have like 30 columns and they're all different types, and I didn't want to play with that or break it, or it would take forever. So starting this morning, actually, I came in early. I created both these connectors from nothing. Snowflake, using the Fivetran interaction, Fivetran was able to create for me schemas that hold my AWS and my Azure cost information. The tables are created with data types verified, and it is just flowing in. It's automatic now too. So I'll get hourly usage data from AWS, and I'll get it daily from Azure. That's an Azure thing. For almost no work, by the way. This basically came for free. You just had to know to turn it on. But once it's in here, I can incorporate it to some of my SnowAlert work, and I can start looking at costs more holistically across my organization with real dollars. I'm so tired of looking at credits. I'm tired of looking at units. What does it cost? What are the dollars? So in Sigma, I can look at my security and monitoring space. In cost, this is very small here, but I have AWS, Azure, the combined views, and Snowflake. So I'll start by looking at kind of our combined usage. Okay, so at the top, you guys can see, for all the time I've been collecting this, Snowflake's been collecting from day one because it does it automatically. It's one of the reasons it's so great. AWS and Azure, when I turned AWS on, it backfilled the previous month of data, so that was nice. And you can see for Azure, I turned that on the 9th. So just a couple days ago, I figured out how to do this. And I can see my costs in real dollars. Of course, the big number being this amount. If I just want to look at a last 30 days or last month, I go back to October 14th. Across our clouds, we spent about $2,200. This is interesting to me because that's not normal for us. This is kind of a lot of money, and it looks, I can see that AWS is the culprit. with a big spike right here. And as I'm talking, I only had enough time to build these dashboards. I thought it'd be cool to dive into this with you guys for a little bit here. Because I actually don't know who did this or why. So this is the combined usage. I have a very high level. I can break it down. If I don't care about Azure, I can just do AWS and Snowflake. Okay, cool. But this would be more of an executive level, and you can even do it by rolling quarter. At the bottom here, I have it so I can dive in deeper. Azure doesn't go down to the hourly level. I noticed it's only daily information. So I can filter out Azure, drill down into hourly. It's not all that meaningful because obviously hourly costs can be low, but there is a huge spike. Okay, already we're learning something. In almost an instant here, how much is that? Oh, $150? In one go. Who spent $150 immediately? Did we buy some reserved instance? Oh, we might have, I don't know. So let's check it out. So right here, this is my combined cost. That's maybe an entry point where an executive would look, but you might start your day there. Just, is there anything I need to bug myself with? If it's all low, fine, nothing. But here I can see there's a spike. Let's go into AWS. Now this is going to have the context of AWS. AWS has different ways to slice and dice in their billing data than Azure does, and that's different from what Snowflake allows. Page is loading. Okay, this one got there first. So I can see, and this one's filtered to the 7th. It's usually a good idea to add a filter if the data is going to get very large, but let's go back to the 14th. And I can see that this happened. I have 2 different AWS accounts. We have a main one and a training one. That's usually good practice. I've seen people with 6 or 7 or more of these accounts. So the spike, if I looked here, I know it's hard to see. Can anyone see where the spike probably occurred? No, is it too small? It's blue, right? So that's main. So I can see right away that I should probably filter just to the main account. This doesn't tell me anything about region, but if I look down here, I can see that we had, on this date, it is the 31st on Halloween. Okay, what were we doing on Halloween? So let's filter to that specific day, just around that, on either end. And here is our big day, 185. And we have Amazon Workspaces is really high. For anyone who doesn't know, that is the virtual machines that allow you not just to spin up and run a Linux instance, but I'm on a MacBook, and Amazon Workspace will run Windows, and I can do screen sharing through that, and that's how I actually get to Windows environments, which has me super nervous because I think I'm the only one who uses it. And it occurred in West, which is where I use it in. But the region is Mumbai. No. So let's filter down to the West region real quick. And the service is Workspaces. We're getting closer. And that is $137. I can't tell who it is. So I have some work to do on this dashboard. I have a few things to wrap up.
I have one ready on for that Snowflake warehouse or warehouses that are running.
Yeah.
All of that data that you're reporting on, what's the charge on that? Is that fairly minimal? Do those run on an ongoing basis or just every so often?
What do you mean?
Where that data is being persisted.
Where it's being persisted.
Yeah.
So Snowflake does expose the data to you. It collects it for free, and then you have to pay for the warehouse to actually go and read it. One of the problems is that the way they expose it to you, it has a warning on their documentation. It can take up to 45 minutes to respond. So if you fire up a warehouse and wait for data, you're spending a lot of money just waiting for the data to show up. And then if you ask another query afterwards and it's not cached, that can happen again. I don't see it takes 45 minutes in my experience. It's 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, but it's still a long time. So I actually use Fivetran to, on a schedule, maybe every hour, every day, suck that data out and persist it in much more performant analytics tables. That's why my dashboard's so fast. People who've seen this before, like Kelly, I used to have a big banner on one of the dashboards that said, "This is slow on purpose," just to warn everyone, because that was faster than actually fixing it. But then I used Snowflake transformations in Fivetran, and now it's pretty fast. It's just not live up to date. So that's another lesson around build your data pipelines to fit what you actually need to do, not the perfect conception of what we would all want, which is perfect, fast, real-time information. So you do spend money on that. We spend money on that, but it's negligible. It's got to be less than a credit a day, right? Less than $3 a day, like a lot less, maybe less than that a month. But that's a good question. Over time, now that we have the better cost stuff, and I can't express that enough, thanks to Fivetran, I did all of that this morning. Like, we had data collecting in S3 since the 9th, but I didn't actually do any of the ETL into Snowflake. I didn't write really any Snowflake code to make this happen. Fivetran just made it appear for me. And then I was able to get into exploring. Now that I know that it's worthwhile, I may go back and build more real-time systems that ingest continuously instead of every hour, every 6 hours, because I know it's valuable. But I didn't know that ahead of time. It could have sucked. It could be that the data was just indecipherable, it was too big, or it was the wrong source, and I would have gone back. So that's why I really enjoy starting with Fivetran. Even if all you do is cheat, like I do, say you have a big CSV and you don't want to manually create the table that you would have to do in the Snowflake uploader, you can go into Fivetran, upload the CSV, they will do all the DDL for you, and then I steal it. That's my DDL now, and I'll turn Fivetran off, and now I have it. But it's still a really good tool. So next steps, what are we doing next? You'll notice some of these are crossed off because we're progressing. The first one, we have Slack integration for highest priority alerts. We want when something pops off for Slack to be notified, we'll have to build a Slack bot for that. However, we do have Slack integration for scheduled charts. So I'm not gonna show you on here. I think it's a bad practice to pull up Slack on a presentation. But on our Snowflake channel internally, every Friday at 3 o'clock, which to me informally announces the weekend now. I think we've all in the company come to enjoy it. It'll send that dashboard that I showed showing our Snowflake usage. It sends it as a picture in the Slack channel with the latest information. And the big number we all watch is the credits used in the last 30 days. I think just by having people see that, people don't have to have login here. I have executive team members that they're really, really good business minds, and I wouldn't exactly trust them to log into something like this. A picture is fine. And if they're interested beyond that, they can get a little time with me and we can walk through it. But usually just the picture of it scheduled every week will tell them things are fine, or if they're bad, I'm on it. That's super valuable. And I don't know of other services that would allow that. That's a Sigma thing that directly integrates with Slack. So, but what I would like to do instead, or in addition to that, is not just for pricing, like updating of people, specifically to like an admin channel, send alerts there so people don't have to know to go look at the dashboards. When something happens, they can be notified. Then I want G Suite, Okta, and Active Directory monitoring. So these are like your identity providers. I want to monitor not just my logs that Snowflake provides, but if you're using an IDP for single sign-on, a lot of people here probably use AD. You can track when people use AD for anything, any of your services you set up. I have AD set up for SSO into Fivetran. We have Google internally set up for most things we use. Almost everything uses Google for SSO. And I can track who's logging in, when they're logging in, where they're logging in from, which my dream is to have a really cool map visualization one of these days. And you can imagine, like, I don't leave the country, so I can set a rule that if I log in from outside the country, that's an alert. So we can add additional layered context that you would normally need maybe an expensive tool to do. And then the last part, AWS and Azure pricing, API with Fivetran. I thought I was gonna write custom functions and let Fivetran schedule them, and instead, the cloud providers already had it. They just dumped it to a place and Fivetran picked it up. I really benefited from that. I didn't have to do anything. It's awesome. And then SnowAlert. I like to mention this to some of the more entrepreneuring folks in here who aren't afraid of a little risk. SnowAlert does include some concept of gathering that data that we need as part of the open source project. The connectors I found to be hit or miss, certainly with documentation. The answer is actually miss. There's not documentation, which is okay. They're building a new thing. They're moving fast. It's a really cool tool. If it did work, the promise of this would be that I can just click here, put in some values, and it would just show up. It would run when the rest of my rule checks run, and I wouldn't have to pay anyone for this. I'd be reliant on an open source thing. Not all enterprises like that. But I'm looking forward to this. And some of the G Suite stuff I'm looking for, the SSO, the AD, Okta for IDPs, they already have that. I have been able to get the Okta system to work for another client, and I've struggled with a lot of the other things. The advice I get right now from the team is go read the Python code in the repo. I'm like, oh, I think I'll just not do any of that and use Fivetran instead, or do it myself with a Snowpipe. Like, no, I'm not gonna go read y'all's super complex Python. So that's an option. But in general, we didn't have to do anything super, I mean, did anything I say here like strike you as something only a true expert could do? I hope not. This is what any of you would do if you had a week or two to look at this. And that was all you had to do. Before I moved to OKC, that was the kind of projects I would get. They just say, go figure this out. Anyone would do this. But sometimes you stumble across the ability to extract insights, extract value that people I know are currently struggling with. And you ask, like, why is no one fixing this? It's super simple. So with that, if you guys have questions, let me know. You can ask them right now, or we can talk later. Any questions, anything? Yeah.
You talked about Fivetran numerous times. I'm not clear on what that part is, but I haven't explained it. How would you describe it?
Yeah, so the question is, what is Fivetran? And that's my bad for not explaining that. Fivetran is one of a number of tools that they will automate your ETL for you. So imagine you have some connectors to source data that you want, and you want them to end up somewhere else. You could build that yourself, and a lot of companies did that, and it can be expensive to do that, and when you're done, you don't always get to reuse that because each source is a little different. They're a company that their full-time job and only thing they do is focus on these connectors and making them well, making them work efficiently. And by buying from them, you save in your total cost of ownership of these connectors, and it's a little easier to actually just show you the website. Sure. So the question was, how would I contrast Fivetran to Streamsets or Tunity? So Streamsets is an open source project. It's a little more stream friendly. So if your data is real time, like not real time, but if it's of a more streaming nature and batch to 5 minutes is not sufficient, you may not want to look at these ETL services. Fivetran costs money. That's one thing. A Tunity, that's a really good question. A Tunity, I find to be more experienced with traditional enterprises. The big differentiator right now is that Tunity supports SAP really, really well. I think Fivetran's working on that. I think even Matillion has some stuff, or they're working on stuff. Matillion is another alternative. They all have their pros and cons. I just personally like Fivetran because the parts I don't like to do, it does really well. And the parts I do like to do, it leaves me alone to do. A Tunity has some like transformation logic, some like GUIs for that. So if your company is not one that likes to write a lot of SQL, that might be an approach for you. I personally really enjoy writing a lot of SQL. I find the GUI stuff to get in my way. So there's a good fit for everyone. Does that help? Yeah. And then back to what Fivetran is. So I have these connectors. I have set up connectivity to my Snowflake database with Fivetran. So I've given it a service account. It has access to that specific Fivetran database and a Fivetran warehouse to run queries in Snowflake. And when I want to add a new data source, I hit connector, and they have a ton here. If you have a specific source you're thinking of, if you're looking for like Google Ads, I have a ton of different analytics connectors, ad connectors. I have some Google Cloud functions that can run, MySQL in the cloud, Postgres. I see a lot is, what was it? SQL Server. This is a common one that you would want to have read your logs and ingest up. NiFi, you're still gonna, there's like not always native connectors, not NiFi, sorry, Streamsets. Streamsets and NiFi often are seen as highly, highly similar alternatives to each other. They're open source. NiFi is an Apache project. I think Streamsets is owned by Cloud Data. They might be an actual company. Anyway, that's more the big data world. If you're on Hadoop and you're in that ecosystem, you may want to consider NiFi or Streamsets. You would still have to do that connectivity layer often, and you would have to do the CDC logic. So that's change data capture, meaning as new records hit, do you always snapshot? That can be appropriate for small tables, but if you have massive tables, billions and billions of records, you only want to grab the new stuff or the change stuff. That logic can sometimes be difficult to implement by hand, and it can be expensive. So if you're a dev shop and you're comfortable with that kind of stuff, absolutely, look at NiFi and look at Streamsets. But if you're not, and you're really not in that business, your core business is something else, like my core business is not necessarily building by hand these things. My core business is gluing together pre-built stuff to get to value. That drives me more towards Fivetran. Does that help with what Fivetran is? These different connectors, if I clicked one, SQL Server is going to ask me for different credentials into my environment. Can connection details, and then as I add that, it'll ask me what tables I want to sync, how I want to do it. For the ones I've already set up, like a GitHub connector, it just tracks all of our history, and I can sync it on a schedule, check my logs. These are the different columns that I actually grab, or the different tables I grab. And this is just, yes, you absolutely can build it by hand. You can do that. And if you find that your use case is super well known ahead of time, or you've done this enough that you know exactly what you need, it'll never change, go ahead and build it yourself, save a little money. Most of the time I find, though, is that this is not a competitive advantage for anyone. As soon as you talk about having to hire one new person to do this, because everyone on your team that could do this, they're probably busy, you start talking about like the value of your time. How long would it take you to acquire this skill set? How much you have to pay them? How long until they're ready to start building this? And it's a pitch we make a lot. We can have you done to production before you could actually get someone scheduled for an interview, depending on the city. Certainly in OKC, that seems to be true. Does that help with what Fivetran is? Cool. Yeah.
I am the data person at my Fivetran, and it's awesome because a lot of data is kept in Excel, but I want access to it without having to ask for access to it. So I wrote VBA for them, so every time they close their spreadsheet, it shoots a CSV. You can email data to this, so it can automatically email data. So then it's available in my Snowflake when I need data. I don't have to go track it down.
That is super cool. Do you want to do a meetup sometime? Because that is the coolest thing I've ever heard.
I hate having to say, hey, can I have that data again?
Yeah. I think, and what I agree about Fivetran or the other tools, like this isn't a bias thing, there's not a return on investment for me anymore in building my own connectivity for things I don't know if they're going to work or not yet. By the time they do work, I find it's not worth going back and fixing because it's kind of a low cost to keep it running. So I'm about moving in a world of more uncertainty where I don't really know what will work, and I've got to try a lot of things. I'm not optimizing for per unit cost. I'm optimizing for agility, and my cycle's going faster. Those are all good questions. We can still have questions, maybe in a more informal environment. I did want to point out that we offer as a service, if your company wants to discuss this, you guys don't really need anything else, or you want to get to know more about it. First of all, I'm located in OKC. I will just come out and hang out with you guys for an hour or two, let you know what I know, give you some free architecture stuff, and if you don't need any other help, cool, like stay in touch, have fun. I have a lot of contacts who do that. But if you do want to jumpstart stuff, you want to add, what did I see? If you want to add a little jet fuel to your data practice, give Hashmap a call. And we have some prepackaged stuff. We won't haggle you on price. We won't make you play the normal enterprise stuff. We like when companies post their prices up front, and we try to do that when we can. And so we have a 5-day engagement that'll get you started with Snowflake, SnowAlert, all this cost monitoring stuff, and you can just put it on autopilot and forget about it and focus on spending less and being more secure, because that's what we're actually after. No one really cares that much about plumbing the data. I do. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate you coming out. If you have any other questions, you can email us. You can do anything you want. Thanks.
Good job, man.